Great. And then Haida, if you can also go ahead and add me as a host, that'll let me see any questions that come into chat, and then we'll be ready to go. So while she's doing that, we will go ahead and kind of get started. Thank you very much again for joining us. We appreciate having you here. We know how busy you are, and how hard it is to even carve out an hour as direct support professionals and providers. So we do appreciate you finding time for us. We hope that you find these sessions informative. Haida, I am not seeing the presentation now, and I don't have a request to share, so I'm not sure what's going on. So we'll keep working on the technical stuff while we get started. My name is Ann Weissent. I'm the provider support person at 19 Services, and we bring you Network 19, a space and place for providers to come together, network, share experiences. And I am here with Haida Hill, who is our quality assurance manager at 19 Services. So we are really excited to bring you this. We meet the third Thursday of each month from 11:30 to 12:30 with our independent providers. We go over a topic we hope that is of interest to you, but we also want you to be actively involved. So please feel free to share your comments, share your experiences. If you want to go ahead and go to the next one, Haida. If you are so inclined, turn your camera on. It's great to put names and faces together. If not, that's absolutely fine. You're more than welcome to stay behind the black screen. Same thing with commenting. Feel free to unmute and jump in anytime. Share your experiences. Let others know what you've been through, what you've experienced, or you can use the chat box. Just so that everybody knows, you will receive an email early next week that will have a copy of the presentation and any handouts. We also will post this recording. And are we recording yet? We will post the recording on our Network 19 YouTube channel. Let me see. Oh, wait, I have it. Okay. Yep, we're good. We are. I see it now. All right. So now that we know we have that recording so we can post, we will go ahead and get started. So today we're going to talk about opening a group home. Just if you want to go into chat and say yes or no, how many of you who are independent providers have either opened and currently operate some type of group living setting? Where you have more than one person living together receiving services from you. Okay. Okay. All right. So we have some folks who said, nope, not yet, but I'm thinking about it. We have some folks who just said no. And then we have some folks who have done it, but they've done it through a different state agency. So that's really helpful to know, because you would think, boy, it's the state, they would have the same requirements and rules and, use the same language. But no, lo and behold, it doesn't work that way. So, so just want to make sure that folks understand that there is a difference. What you learn here today, and what we talk about today is only for a setting in which you're going to serve people with developmental disabilities. So if you're looking to serve folks through the mental health field, maybe the elderly, there's different processes through different state agencies for those. So, okay, so let's talk about some of the terminology. The one thing about DODD system is we are what I call a system of semantics, meaning that the words matter. We use a lot of words. We use a lot of words interchangeably. So let's focus on the ones that apply to residential services. And all of these are the ones that we are going to touch on throughout today's presentation. Ida? And if you could make sure, if you're not already on mute, if you could mute yourself, please. I know we're hearing someone's conversation. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about licensed versus certified. I hear this all the time. I will talk with a provider who will say to me, I'm a licensed provider. And I'm confused. You're licensed by whom? What kind of license do you have? Because in Ohio, in the DODD system, we certify providers. So anyone who is a provider of services, excuse me, who is billing the waiver program, had to go through a process where they became certified. Sorry about that. And that certification is what allows them to provide and bill for and be reimbursed for services provided to a person on a waiver. So certification is for people. It is for you as a provider. License and being licensed is about a physical environment. It is about a house. It is about an address. It is about a location. So the easiest way to think about it is that DODD licenses buildings and they certify people. So it's really important to understand the difference, especially when you are having conversations with county board or the department, to make sure that you understand the difference between being licensed, a setting being licensed, and being certified as a provider. All right. Go ahead to the next one. The other thing we want to talk about today, now that we understand that being certified has nothing to do with the building in which you provide services, but being licensed does, we want to talk about the difference between a licensed setting and an unlicensed settings. And when does it have to be licensed? When is it okay for it not to be licensed? I don't want to get in trouble because I'm providing services in one setting and I'm supposed to have a license, but I don't have a license for that setting. So that's one of the things that we're going to talk about today. A lot of times, folks will reach out to the county board or the department to find out about opening a group home. And the term group home, that particular word, is really just a very general category that really means people that are living together in a congregate setting. So more than one person living together in a setting in which they are receiving services. In reality, the formal terminology for that is a licensed residential setting. So when it needs to be licensed and you have multiple people living together, you might call it a group home, but if you start looking at the rules and you're looking at the laws, you're going to see the term licensed residential setting. In a setting that doesn't have to be licensed, where you have people living together and you look at the rules, you're going to see the term congregate living. So want to make sure that you just understand that a licensed residential facility is a licensed setting, and a congregate living setting is a community-based setting that is not licensed. Okay, go ahead. So, what are the different types of residential settings in which a person most generally receives paid services? So, people with disabilities may live in a private home. It might be a home owned by them themselves. We have a lot of people in our system who have gotten a loan and have their own home. It might be a home in which they're still living with family members or friends who are not receiving paid services. It also could be a home that they rent from a landlord. So those are private homes. Same as, we live in private homes. We either own our home or some of us still live at home in mom and dad in the basement, uh, and some of us rent from a landlord. So people with developmental disabilities can live in the same types of private settings. Generally, when a person with a disability lives in a private home, they may be receiving, if they need supports, some drop-in services that are less than 24 hours. So as an independent provider, you may be going over to John's house where he lives with his mom and dad and, providing 6 hours on a Saturday so that mom and dad have some time to go out and do something. Or maybe you go over 3 days a week for 4 or 5 hours, so that mom can go to her job. There may be a lot of reasons, but usually it's less than 24 hours and it's intermittent drop-in services, or you're picking them up and taking them out into the community. So that's generally what happens in private homes. In addition, we do have some folks that live in private homes that are what we call independent living. And those are folks who don't necessarily need any paid supports. So they are living independently, they're able to take care of their own needs, or maybe they have unpaid natural supports like family members who help them out. They just don't need a paid provider. So when someone says independent living, that's what we're talking about. Now, that person may be going to a adult day program, or getting vocational services through the waiver, but they maybe are not getting any homemaker personal care services. Then we have shared living. And so shared living is when a person lives with their provider. And that provider can be related to them. It can be their parent who is a provider if they're an adult. It could be a sister or a family friend. Or it could just be one of you as an independent provider that maybe they don't have any other relationship with, but they met you as their provider and there was some decision that the best way to support that person, and what they wanted was to live in, a home with you guys. A lot of our folks don't have, significant family relationships. There's a lot of people that, just don't have that. And so they've been living independently, maybe lonely, and then all of a sudden they get a waiver and the county board is able to provide them some services and they come and visit you. They pick you as the provider and they're like, wow, they've got a kid that goes to basketball and I love basketball, and they sit down to family meals every day and I'd like to be part of that family life. And so shared living is really meant a place where a person lives with their provider, in which they engage in the everyday activities of family life. And then we have, again, what I talked about earlier, the terminology of group home, which is just a congregate living setting in which more than one person with a disability lives and receives services, but the setting isn't licensed. And we'll talk in a minute about when a setting has to be licensed and when it doesn't have to be licensed. But a group home or congregate living setting is a setting that isn't required to be licensed, but more than one person and no more than four live together. So you can only have a maximum of four people receiving waiver services that live together, because federal law says that a waiver is a service that you get instead of getting institutional services. So you're not living in an institution, but an institution is anything that's 5 beds or more. So to be a non-institutional setting, it has to be no more than four people. So congregate living settings or group homes can only be four or fewer people. And then we have licensed residential facilities. So if there is some reason that home, that building has to be licensed, then there are two types of licensed residential facilities. The first one is a waiver facility, and those are facilities in which the people that live there are receiving their service through a waiver, just like you as independent providers are providing to them. And then we have intermediate care facilities for individuals with intellectual disabilities, a big mouthful. And the acronyms for that you might hear are ICFIID or simply ICF, because we throw around a lot of alphabet soup. in this field. So it's important for you to know if you hear ICF, that means intermediate care facility. And the difference between a waiver funded facility and an ICF is that that waiver funded facility is going to look much more like a typical home, where people are, going to work and coming and going, and they sit around in the living room at night and watch a movie, and it's just a typical home. Not that they don't do those things in an ICF, but in that ICF, it looks a little more like a medical facility, maybe similar to nursing home, because they're going to be providing all of the person's services for them. And we'll talk more about this in a minute, but you're going to see, PT, OT, and speech going on in the home sometimes. Maybe there are actual nurses that are working shifts in the home. So it's a little more medical based, and it looks a little bit more like a traditional institution that we might be familiar with, like a nursing home or something like that. Okay. All right. And so just to give you a kind of a visual idea of what a licensed waiver facility might look like, they look just like any other home. A lot of times you will not even know that there's one in your neighborhood. So these are just some kind of generic houses, but generally you have no idea that is a licensed residential facility, because it looks like any other single family home in your community. Next. You'll also see some interior differences when we talk about waiver homes versus ICF. As you can see from these, it just looks like your house or my house. People decorate however they want to decorate. The dogs on the couch in that one, maybe they do have pets, but it's very individualized. It is very much, again, similar to the home that you and I would live in. But we might see some differences in what we call the ICFs. Next. So while a lot of our ICFs have really changed over the last 10, 12 years, you're beginning to see more and more ICFs that look less institutional and they look more community based. You're seeing more and more ICFs that, again, you drive by them and you don't even know that that's not a residential home in the community. But sometimes there are those little giveaways. The one on the left, you see it's got parking spaces with parking signs out front. It's got the more traditional commercial entry door. So you might see that and think, oh, is that a church? Is that what is that? Oh, okay, it's an ICF. So it looks more like a commercial building. We're also seeing some new construction that looks similar to the one on the right, where interior wise, it's one single living area, but they've set it up so that externally, maybe it looks like a duplex. So again, you might see that in your neighborhood, and it just doesn't jump out to you that it is some type of an institutional setting. But we also have traditional ones. There are still institutional settings in Ohio that have over 100 people living in them. Next. Also, you might find that the interior of an ICF is a little different. It might be a little more formal, a little more sterile than that those pictures we saw earlier. There are certain rules that apply because it is a federal program around like the kitchen area and what has to be in a kitchen. So you might see something that looks a little more like a commercial kitchen. There tend to be fewer private bedrooms, though, again, a lot of ICFs are moving towards that. So you might see bedrooms where you have people sharing rooms. So just a little bit of the differences so that you understand the differences between the two different types of licensed residential facilities. Go ahead. So we're going to talk in a minute about when you have to be licensed and when you don't. But one of the things that's important to understand if you begin down the path or the journey of opening a licensed residential facility is the difference between the terminologies of beds and licenses. So you might hear someone say, hey, I want to open a licensed facility, but I don't have any beds. And they're not talking about going to IKEA and buying, 4 beds to put in someone's bedroom. What they're talking about is I don't have 4 slots for people to move into. So when you do receive a license, you're going to get a license for that building that tells you what the maximum capacity is. And so for a waiver setting, the maximum capacity is 4. So you could potentially have a license that has 1 bed. So only one person is going to live there. It has 2 beds, 2 people are going to live there. It has 3 beds, or it has 4 beds. So when we talk about beds, we're not talking about furniture. We're talking about the capacity of the facility as it's indicated on that facility's license. Okay. The one thing also about licenses versus beds is that if you do have a licensed residential facility and it is licensed for 4, you can choose to break that license down. You could break that license down into 4 1-bed licenses. You could break that license down into 2 2-bed licenses. You could break that license down into a 3-bed setting and a 1-bed setting. So you can use those 4 beds to create additional settings, but you still only have a total of 4 beds. Okay. I hope that makes sense. That is that is one concept that a lot of people just don't understand when they're first talking about potentially opening a licensed residential facility. So there are some rules that do apply to opening a licensed residential facility, and everything that is in gold is a link. So you can click on that link and it will take you to the DODD website or whatever the website is. So there is a specific set of rules that DODD has for licensed residential facilities. And that talks about the maximum bed count. So we've already talked about that, right? For any waiver setting, whether it's licensed or unlicensed, you can only have a maximum of 4 people receiving services in that setting. So the maximum bed count for a license is 4 beds when it's waiver funded. It also has rules around physical environment. So a licensed residential facility has to meet some specific physical environment requirements. And those are requirements that don't exist in an unlicensed setting. So if my team says, hey, it's okay, Anne wants to rent this house. She's asked us, for our support. We went with her to take a look at it. It's a great house, but man, that bedroom is really, really tiny and it doesn't have a window that goes out. It doesn't have an exterior window. Well, it's not a licensed facility. So unless the team would say there's some health and safety issue with me living there, I get to decide that I don't care that it doesn't have an exterior window. And I don't care that it's a really small bedroom. Maybe I chose an efficiency apartment. It doesn't even have a bedroom, right? But in an unlicensed setting, with the help of my team or my guardian or whoever I rely on to help me make good choices, I may choose a setting regardless of whether it meets these physical environment requirements. In a licensed residential facility, I still have choice on whether I live in that facility or not, but I don't have choice about the physical environment. My bedroom has to be at least 90 square foot. My bedroom has to have an exterior window. And so those are all covered in the DODD rules. There's also rules around the proximity of licensed facilities. So if a entity wants to open multiple licensed facilities, they have to know that they can't put them on the same piece of property. They have to know that they can't put them on properties that are side by side. And then there's also the suitability of settings rule, which talks about and gives us our guidance on when a property has to be licensed and also on who can license a facility. So one of the things that you all need to know going into this is that if we determine that the setting that you are considering for a group home falls under the requirements of being licensed, you would have to look at another way of doing it because independent providers cannot license a residential facility. They can only be licensed by an agency. So, as we talk through the reasons of when something has to be licensed, it's important for you to think, okay, I've been thinking about buying a house and getting it licensed. Oh, can I do that? If the answer is no, it has to be licensed, then you have to have another conversation with yourself, which is, well, I'm an independent provider. I can't hold a license. Only agencies can. So, do I want to do this? And if I want to do this, what does that look like? And it would look like you having to get certified as an agency provider or somehow working with an existing agency to have your building become a licensed residential facility. But all of that is covered in these DODD rules. In addition to the DODD rules that apply, if you are thinking of opening a licensed residential facility, or you determine that that's the route you have to go, then you also have to look into local rules, laws, and ordinances because zoning ordinances are going to apply. So you have to know, can I open a business? Because a licensed residential facility really is, by local zoning folks, considered a business. Can I open it in this zoning area, this area, based on how it's zoned? And a lot of times we have to educate local officials that licensed residential facilities of 4 beds or fewer typically meet the definition of a single family home. So they can go in any residentially zoned area. But sometimes that takes a little bit of conversation with your local officials. So you've got to be aware of the local rules. You also have to be familiar and make sure that the licensed residential facility is in compliance with the Ohio Fire Code. So again, you're going to want to take a look at that. I have found that one of the best resources for understanding the Ohio Fire Code is to call the local fire department of wherever you want to open that licensed facility and talk to whoever their inspector is. That inspector knows that fire code inside and out. I'm in the process of buying a business here where I live. It's a t-shirt printing business. So we have a big industrial dryer in there to dry the shirts after they get printed. It runs up to about 425 degrees. It puts off a lot of heat. I didn't know anything about them. And so I had him come. He walked through the building with me and he told me what all the rules are about how far that piece of equipment has to be from a wall, and all that kind of stuff, how we vent it. So your local fire inspector is going to be great if you're wanting to open a licensed residential facility. You can talk with him and he's going to tell you what those requirements are. And then it won't apply to you all most generally because I don't think a lot of independent providers open agencies to open ICFs. But if you do, there is federal rules that apply to ICFs because they are federally funded. And so that's the link to those. Go ahead to the next one. So when do I need a license? So there are 2 times in Ohio, or 2 situations in Ohio, in which you are absolutely required to have a license to provide to have a building licensed in which you want to provide residential services. The first is based on capacity. If there are more than 4 unrelated people receiving DD services, living in the home, then that home has to be licensed. So you're scratching your head. You're saying, Ann, you already told us they can't be licensed for more than 4. So why does that even matter? The only reason that matters is that there are some existing licensed facilities out there that you guys might be saying, hey, you said 4, Ann, but there's one in my county that has 6 people living together. So those are historical, what we call legacy homes. They were licensed years and years and years ago before the 4-person prohibition or restriction was in place, and they are grandfathered. So there is language in the rules that allow them to continue to operate. But because they're over 4, they always will have to have a license. The other reason that you have to be licensed in Ohio is based on ownership. And so this is where those of you who are currently independent providers who've been thinking like, hey, I'm hearing all these stories about people who are buying a house and then they're serving people in their house and they're getting rent. This is what you have to think about. You have to have a license if the owner of the home and the provider of services in that home are the same entity or the same person. So, how many of you now are saying, dang, Ann, you just put out my fire. You totally blew what I was thinking about I wanted to do. And there are some really good reasons why this exists. There is a potential, unintended potential of conflict of interest. And what that means is that when I have my provider hat on and I'm serving John, who lives in the house that I own, and John has some significant behavioral challenges. And let's say it's just getting out of hand. John has broken 3 windows in the last 3 months. I'm having to pay. I'm the landlord too. It's costing me money. He has broken the mirrors in the bathroom. He's just taken a toll on this house I own. I'm just going to tell him he has to get out. Well, you're taking your issues as a provider and you're solving them through your authority as a landlord. And so that is a potential conflict of interest. You don't have that ability to say, hey, because I'm your provider and you're not following your plan or doing what I told you to do, or you're causing, um, um, damage to my property, that's it, get out, right? In Ohio, landlord tenant laws require a landlord to go through a legal eviction process to evict someone. And so, unfortunately, what we have seen and why this is in place to protect the person is we have seen those situations where the provider, as the landlord, has used their role as the provider to kick the person out and say, I'm no longer going to provide you services. So, being licensed requires that there's a lease agreement, that you go through that legal eviction process. And so, Ohio, in order to make sure that we are following federal rules, and we're going to talk about what those federal rules are in a minute, because of that, you have to be licensed if you own the home and you're going to be the provider of services. Okay. All right, let's go. So this is the federal rule I'm talking about, and I'm going to go through this very quickly. I apologize, but we only have an hour, and there's a ton here. But what you have to understand, and then you can look through these 9 requirements when you get the PowerPoint and the handouts yourself. What you do have to understand is that in order to provide waiver services and for the state of Ohio to receive federal funding for those waiver services, we have to promise the federal government that we'll do certain things to protect and ensure the services that people are getting through the federal waiver dollars. So that's community integration, making sure that waiver dollars are helping people integrate in their community. It is making sure that individuals get a right to make a choice about where they receive their services, what day program do they want to go to, who do they want to provide their transportation services, who do they want to provide their homemaker personal care services. We have to make sure that wherever they're receiving their services, that it ensures their privacy, that they are treated with dignity and respect. Next one. We also have to make sure that they have the right to autonomy and independence, that they get to choose their daily activities, they get to interact with whoever they want to interact with, and that they can access their physical environment without restriction. So they have a key to their house so they can get into their own house. They have to have a choice of services and providers. So the federal government says if you are going to receive waiver funding, you have to make sure that the people that are receiving those waiver funded services get a choice of providers. And when you have a landlord, you have a provider who's also the landlord, there is that risk that as the provider, they are going to not give them choice. They are going to kick them out without any due process. And so in order to say to the feds, we're going to make sure people have choice of providers, then we are going to license those settings so that when the person chooses that setting, they understand that they're living in that setting and they're going to get the services from the provider who licenses that setting. And that if they no longer want to be there, they have a right to move so that they can get services somewhere else. Or if they no longer want that provider, they have a right to move and choose another provider. It also, under this federal law, gives them that right to stay there until they choose to move, unless the licensee, the person who is providing services and owns the home, goes through the legal eviction process. And that means they have to have a legally enforceable agreement. So a rent, or I'm sorry, a rent agreement or a lease. And that is what protects them against eviction. So all of those things, I'm sorry, there's actually three more. Privacy and personalization, control over schedule and access, and physical accessibility. Those are in the next slide. So all of those things have to weigh into whether a setting has to be licensed or not, because in order to ensure all of these protections under the federal requirements, the landlord and the provider have to have some distinguishable differences in their roles, and those are laid out in the licensure rules. Okay, I hope that makes sense, as just kind of explaining why a setting that is owned by the same person who's going to provide the services or the same entity has to be licensed. Ohio had to put some rules in place to make sure that we are following the federal rules. So the Fed said, here's our rules. Each state, you have to tell us how you're going to implement those rules. So in order to implement those rules, Ohio came up with the state law, the state rule 5123902, which again, that is a link that will take you directly to that rule. That ensures that the service setting is suitable for the person, that it is meeting all of these federal requirements. And they did that by identifying two types of residential settings that have to have some type of oversight by the state. And those are settings that are either provider controlled or provider owned. And a provider controlled setting is a residence where the provider and landlord are not the same, but they have some type of relationship that gives the provider some appearance of authority over the rental agreement. And so I'll just pull out a few of these. You can read these later. They're also outlined in rule. So if a entity is owned by the independent provider, that is a provider controlled setting. So what does that mean? That means that you, as the provider, the independent provider, also owns the house. Then that is a provider controlled setting. And there has to be some agreement in place. Well, the only agreement that can be in place is that it is a shared living setting, because it either has to be licensed or shared living. A provider controlled residential setting could also be a setting in which one of your family members owns it. So you're the provider, you're the licensed provider, you're the certified provider, but your husband owns the rental property. It's in his name only. Well, there's a relationship there. So again, it would be considered provider controlled, and there would have to be a rental or a lease agreement. So there are a number of these that apply. The majority of the others apply to more of an agency situation. But for independent providers, if you, as the independent provider, own the entity that owns the property the person is going to live in, it has to be licensed unless you are also living in the home with them, which is shared living. And then it becomes a provider controlled setting, and there should be some type of agreement between you and the person receiving services that addresses that living situation. Or if your family member owns the other home. So, excuse me. A provider owned setting is required to be licensed. And these are what provider owned settings are. And when a single person or entity owns the property and will be the provider. So, for instance, I own ABC Provider Agency, and ABC Provider Agency also owns the property. Or I own ABC Provider Agency and I own a different agency called Aspar Realty. But both of those agencies operate under the same tax ID number. So even though I've named them differently, I'm still operating them under a single tax ID number that would be provider owned. Or if there is a sublease agreement between me, the provider, and the property owner. So let's say I know the property owner from church. I'm not related to them. So there's no relationship. The property owner doesn't work for me. The property owner is completely separate company. They run a completely separate company than mine. So they say, hey, you're my friend. I'll sublease to you and then you can rent it to the people. Well, once that person who actually owns the home subleases to you, they've really given you the landlord hat. They've passed that responsibility off to you. So now you are acting as a landlord. So if that's a situation too, where again, as an independent provider, you're like, well, I don't own the home, but I have a friend who owns it and she'll let me pay her rent and then I'll rent it to those people that I support and then they'll pay me and then I'll use their money to pay my friend. That puts you in the position as a landlord and it would have to be licensed. Okay. So these are definitions of provider owned settings, which would require that you have a license to operate them. And the link at the bottom will take you to the department's website that defines each of those scenarios. Okay. We're going to pass that one because it really is just exactly what I just said a second ago about subleasing. So let's say that we have gotten to the part where you have done your due diligence. You've thought about all these rules. You've talked with maybe somebody at the county board. You've reached out to HIDA or whatever, right? And you're like, well, what I want to do is going to require me to be licensed. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is get certified as an agency to do what I want to do. So I am going to start this all with the caveat that currently there is a moratorium in place. I'm sure that all of you are aware of that, but just in case you're not, as part of Ohio's plan for addressing waste, abuse, and misuse of Medicaid dollars, they have put a moratorium, they put a temporary stop to certification of new providers, not just DODD providers, any Medicaid provider type. So that does include a new DODD provider agencies. So you're going to have some time to plan if that's something you need to do, because you are not going to be able to go through the certification process until at least November 14th. The current moratorium is in place until November 14th. I am hearing just some rumor mill conversation that they may align that with new rules that are coming out January 1st and extend that moratorium through January 1st so that the new rules that are going to outline a new certification process will happen at the same time that they get any new applications. That is absolutely rumor. There's been no official determination of that, but just saying that to let you know it is going to be a few months before you could actually become an agency provider. But let's say we are at that time and you have submitted your application to become an agency provider and you are now certified. This is the process that you would then follow. Okay. So, first of all, in order to open a new facility, you have to have that license that has those beds attached to it. And a lot of people have heard, well, Ohio isn't giving out any new licenses, and that is absolutely true. The state is not issuing any new licensed bed slots. The state can continue to work within the number of licensed beds that are in the state. So that is called the statewide cap. So if you add up all the licenses and all of the capacity of the each license, how many beds each license has, that is the current statewide cap of licensed beds. We can never go more than that. So we can't issue any new, but we can work within that current cap. And that cap only changes if someone who has a current licensed bed voluntarily gives it back to the state of Ohio or if the state of Ohio goes through some legal process to revoke or take that bed back. But that capacity only goes down when beds are surrendered or revoked. So if a bed is empty, it is still there. It is still part of the count. If a provider has a bed that they are currently not using, it's not part of a current license, they still own it until they decide to relicense it. So that those beds are still available. And so if you can access those and get ownership of those, you can then use those to open a new licensed facility. There is a couple of ways that I suggest trying to find out who might have existing licensed bed slots that you can become the owner of. The first is to reach out to your county board, have a conversation with them, find out if they know of anybody currently providing services who has no intention of continuing to use those beds, and might be looking to get rid of them. You can also go to DODD's website and go to the provider search. You can search under licensed facilities. That's going to bring up every licensed facility, and it's going to tell you what their current license capacity is. And then it's going to tell you what their current census is. So if they have a capacity of 4, but their current census is only 2, then you know that they have 2 vacant beds. And you might call them and say, hey, I see you've got a couple vacant beds. Are you going to use them? I'm interested in them. What would you like to do with them? And then the third is we have in Ohio some provider associations. These are groups that represent providers. They work closely with providers. They generally are providing information, resource, and legislative support to providers, but they know a lot about what's going on with their members. And so they may, in fact, know of a provider who has licensed beds who is interested in transferring ownership. So those are the 3 ways that I suggest that you look into that. Also, whatever, use social media, make cold calls to other providers, be creative, but you have to find those beds that are available. Once you find those available beds, ownership can be transferred from the current owner to you. The department does not get involved in what that transfer looks like. I have seen licensed beds transferred for $10,000 each. I've seen licensed beds transferred for $1 each. I've seen licensed beds traded for a motorcycle, and I've seen licensed beds given from one family member to another for nothing. So we, at the department level, the system does not get involved in what that looks like, but you do have to go through a process of changing ownership with the department. So once you have found those beds, you've negotiated what that transfer will look like, then you will work with the current owner to send an email to DODD at licensuredevelopmentapps@dodd.ohio.gov, and then you will use that to change the ownership from the current owner to another. You should review the rules to make sure that you know what is required before you start the process of applying. There are fees associated with applying, so those fees are non-refundable. You don't want to submit that application until you know that you can actually get the building licensed. You don't want to buy a building unless you're familiar with the rules and you know that that building, the physical environment, is going to meet the requirements of that rule. So you're going to want to absolutely review those rules. I also encourage you at this time to have conversations with your county board. Let them know what your plans are. Ask them about whether there are people that are in need of housing that is, in a licensed residential facility. And then you're also going to meet with DODD if necessary. And I highly recommend this if you are planning to construct something new. Okay? Once you've done all of that prep work, then you are ready to submit a new facility application, which is available through PSM, the same place you go to do your initial certification application or your renewal. It's just another application in there. And you need to submit that at least 60 days prior to the date that you want to open it. So we do have a question. Somebody's asking, how does this provide enough beds for everyone in need? So again, not everyone is required to live in a licensed residential facility. Being licensed is only dependent upon whether the provider is also acting as the landlord. There are lots of other residential options for people receiving services outside of licensed residential facilities. They can rent from a private landlord. They can go through, certain programs that are out there to help them buy their own house. Many of them may live with family members, but the majority of people that are served within our system, actually, if they're not living at home with family, they're living in a privately rented apartment or home. Excuse me. Okay, next slide. I did mention the licensure fees, so this just shows you what they are. The only one that applies for a new license is the facilities with 1 to 15 beds, because it would be limited to 4. So it is $100 fee. But again, that is non-refundable. So you want to make sure that whatever your plan is, that it is a plan that will most likely result in being submitted or getting a license. Next one. You also, once you select that proposed opening date, you're going to make sure that you are communicating that date to DODD. They're also going to want to know the name and address of the city, village, or township clerk. That's one of the reasons why the application has to be in 60 days in advance, is that local officials do have 30 days to provide feedback on any new licensed residential facility being developed. So the state is going to send them a notice to whatever address and contact information that you provide them. A licensed residential facility has to have an administrator. So whoever that administrator is has to complete the online administrator training, and that will be again shared with the department. Each facility has to have an emergency response plan that includes how you're going to train DSPs and the people supported on what to do in case of an emergency specific to that building. And then there also has to have a visual evacuation plan. You also have to obtain required inspections. It's certainly known that the inspections may not be done by the time you submit the application. So you can be gathering them after the application has been submitted. You have to have a fire inspection from the building. You have to have a water and septic inspection if the building isn't on city water or sewer. You also have to have a heating and air conditioning inspection by an HVAC contractor and an electrical inspection by an electrical contractor. Next. Once you have all of those things and the building is ready to go, you're going to notify DODD that you are ready for what they call the feasibility study. Feasibility study is really a review survey that looks at everything except for service delivery, because obviously you're not delivering any services here yet. So they're looking at the physical environment, the inspections, all of those things. They can identify deficiencies, areas that you don't have completed, and you would need to get those corrected or completed prior to the issue of the license. But once all of that is done, your license for that facility is issued, and then you can begin, if you haven't done so already, working with the county board to find individuals who want to move into the licensed residential facility. An initial compliance review, and I will correct this before we send this out. An initial compliance review will be conducted within 9 months of the date of opening, and you will receive a 1-year license. You will then receive another licensure review within that 1 year, and then you can, with the successful completion of a compliance review, receive a 3-year license. If you are not in compliance and the outcome of the licensure review is not good, it's the same as the outcome of your provider certification review. You can go into a sanction. That can include a suspension of admissions, allowing you to continue to operate but not take on any new business, or potentially they can revoke the facility license. So you've determined that what you want to do is going to require a license. As an independent provider, you've gone through the certification process to apply to become an agency. You've gotten approved as an agency provider. You've then started the process of getting the residential setting license because it's required to be licensed. You've received your licensure certificate. You have people who've moved in. The next question is always, how do I get paid? And so just like you get paid providing HPC services to people outside of a licensed residential facility, you're going to do the same thing. You are going to provide the services within that setting based on what's approved in their plan and what's authorized in their pause. You're going to document those services, and then you're going to submit billing and be reimbursed. The only thing that's a little bit different in a licensed residential facility is you also have access to what is called room and board. So as the landlord entity, which you can be because it's licensed, as the landlord entity, you are able to then charge room and board, which covers the person's rent, utilities, and other necessities. There is an entire rule on room and board. The county board will be involved in helping you determine what that room and board payment is. And so that is another funding source that is available. There is a question, is Ohio still accepting applications for new licenses, even though there is a cap on the amount of beds they have available? Yes, as we discussed previously, there are unused licenses that exist within that cap. And if you go through those different places that I suggested, you can often find someone who has unused licenses. And once you find them, you work with them to transfer the ownership of those licenses, whatever that looks like, whether you're buying them, whether they're giving them to you, whatever. And then once you and the current owner have come to that agreement, you will submit a change of ownership application to the department. Once the change of ownership is approved by the department, you then own those beds and you can submit the application to develop a new facility. So I hope that answers your question. Next slide. So we talked earlier about the rules and being sure that you are looking at those rules. I call this stacking. There are certain situations in DODD services where it's not just the DODD rules that apply. There are multiple rules that are stacked together in order to govern whatever you're doing. In the case of residential services in a licensed home, you have to be aware of local zoning laws. So you'll need to reach out to local officials to talk through those. You have to be aware with the Ohio Fire Code. All of these gold colored terms are links. So this will take you directly to the Ohio Fire Code. There is the DODD rules under 5123.2, 5123.3, and 5123.9. So you're going to want to make sure that you are familiar with those. Next. I always refer you to DODD. They are the experts. So if you have questions, if you want to talk specifically about a plan, something you're thinking about, I encourage you to reach out to DODD. If you have questions about what do the rules look like, what is a feasibility, what would I be required to have in place, you can reach out to compliance through their mailbox. If you have questions about the application process, the licensing process, you can reach out to the licensure development group through their email address. And then if you just need general provider support, obviously you can reach out to Haida and I. That is something that we can tailor to you through 19 services. But you can also reach out to DODD's provider support unit for general support issues. All right. That was a lot in a very, very short period of time. I don't expect that everything made sense, that you kind of were able to absorb it all in an hour. We are available. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Our email addresses are on here. Also, we do record our sessions and they'll be posted on our YouTube channel. And this is a link to the YouTube channel. Again, you will have all of these active links when we send this to you next week. You can go back and listen to this presentation. You can reach out to subject matter experts at DODD. There is a ton of support out there for you. If you are thinking about opening a group home, a congregate living setting, and you want to know, does it need to be licensed or doesn't it need to be licensed? We will be back with you on September 17th at or around 11:30-ish. I'm trying to do my best to cut off the agencies about 5 or 10 minutes early, but I just never can get that done. So we appreciate you being patient till about 11:35, like we were today, but we will get to you again as timely as we can. Any just last comments or questions? Haida, anything you want to share?
I have one quick
I
question.
think just that
Oh, Haida,
reminder,
one,
I would
one
say,
second. We do have a question. Sorry.
okay,
Kevlin, was that you?
Yes. Okay, let's say you're an independent provider
Uh-huh.
and you're working with individuals and you switched to be certified for the agency. Now, what changes with the current individuals you're working with? Does anything changes with that? Like you have to stop services or how does that work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So if you're currently an independent provider and you're going to become certified as an agency, whether it's because of licensure or not, anytime you as a provider make a change, you have to communicate that to the team. So you need to be reaching out to their SSA saying, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what we're planning to do. We're still interested in supporting these folks. We have relationships with them, but we also want them to be transparent so they understand what we're doing. And we'd love for the SSA and the team to help us, explain this because the person ultimately has free choice of provider. And if for some reason they're like, well, I really like Kevlin as a guy, but man, I don't want an agency, or I don't want Kevlin hiring, somebody else to come in and take care of me because he's going to become an agency. I have the right to decide not to stay with you if you make that change. Generally, I would say when people do that, we see people go right along with the independent provider to their agency because families and people like that relationship. They like that continuity of care. But it really is important for you to communicate that with the team, with the person, so that they understand this is what you're doing. So they do understand that they do have a right to say, yeah, I liked you as an independent provider, but I don't want to go with you as an agency. But I really think that if you're doing a good job, if you're a good provider, if you're communicating and talking through this with them, with their guardians, with their families, and with their teams, the likelihood is they're going to be like, hey, we've really liked Kevlin as an independent provider or whoever. We're going to stick with them. But that's my suggestion is always communicate those changes.
Okay, so the code and billing and everything like that will change also.
Yes, so it would have to change because if you again become an agency, you're going to have a new provider number. It's a different provider type. Independent providers are one provider type, agencies another provider type. So all of that administrative stuff will change. So it would take the county board again being involved in that conversation so that they can go in and change the pause to reflect the agency name. So they or change the ISP to reflect the agency name and then change the pause to reflect the agency's name and their new provider number.
Okay, thank you. That helped.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Great question.
I was just going to kind of put a bookend on that again, that we are currently, the state of Ohio is currently in a moratorium. So to walk through the changing of certifications and those types of things are a tad bit complex at the moment because of the moratorium in place. So I had seen a comment as well in the chat about a county board putting an application on pause. That's all tied to that conversation. So just kind of want to put that out there that we do have some pieces in place that are pausing what we're currently doing, especially when it comes to certifications. So.
And please, if you're not already, join us on our Facebook page, Network 19. We do our best. Like if there's going to be changes to the certification process, if there's going to be some change to the moratorium, if they're going to extend it, anything like that, We will absolutely work with you and get that information out through Network 19. Um, we have somebody that says they were caught in the pause and then denied. And so, really, that denial, generally, unless they denied you because you're not eligible to be a provider, which they would have to tell you the reason, generally, that is just for them to clean up their system so that when it reopens again, they don't have you stuck in that system. So if you applied, the moratorium went into effect, you got a denial, unless your denial was based on some other reason, like you're not eligible for criminal reasons or things like that to be a provider, you can then reapply when that moratorium is lifted. And I know that's not, the best for everybody, the timing, you can't time something like this. And I don't think a lot of people had foresight that this was, I think we knew changes were coming, but I don't know that the moratorium was something people were thinking about. Um, I will say this, and please don't anyone take this negatively. Um, Having worked at DODD for 30 years before I came over to 19 Services in December, um, I think it's a good I think it's a good time for reevaluation. I think with current federal things that are going on, and we know that there's going to be more stringency put on access to Medicaid services. We know that there's going to be more oversight and things like that coming down from the feds. As a state, I don't think it's a bad idea that we said, wait, let's stop everything for a few minutes and make sure that when we open it back up, we are opening it back up in a way we think will pass the test of the federal government. Because I think the last thing we wanted as a state is to be reactionary and have the feds come in and say, you're doing this all wrong. We're shutting it down. We're no longer going to fund any Medicaid services in Ohio. So I think being proactive and saying, let's take a pause so that we can reevaluate the system and make the changes we need to make. I think in the long run, as far as access to Medicaid reimbursement and things like that, it was probably a good decision for the state of Ohio to make. And I know that doesn't help for folks like Steve, who just mentioned that he got caught in the middle of it, right? But I do think in the long run for our system, it's probably a good breather for 6 months and then restart things. So just personal opinion, but I hope folks will take this as an opportunity to say, okay, it's going to be better. Things will be better when it reopens. So anyway, that's it. All right. Well, thank you all so much. I don't see any other questions or comments in our chat. Again, our emails, you will have them. So if you need anything, feel free to reach out. And we appreciate taking time out of your busy days to spend an hour and 10 minutes with us. Thank you so much. Bye,
Thanks.
everyone.